Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. That's
that's amazing.
going back to the late 1970s, early 1980s. I was doing stand up in New York, and I was at New York University and taking on a lot of jobs, minimum wage jobs, and jobs to support my comedy habit. And I ended up really just serendipitously at a brokerage firm. And I really decided, or I really embraced, I really discovered that this Wall Street shtick was fascinating. And at that time, it was when the bull market was just starting on Wall Street. This was back in 1982, 1983. So I just jumped into Wall Street. I just loved the whole atmosphere of it. And you get to work during the day instead of working nights when you're doing comedy. And I brought that kind of comedy to my selling, which I did very well as a salesman on Wall Street, just because I could get people on the phone, keep them on the phone, and get them buying stuff. And then I kind of went into semi-retirement in 1990, and then I went to Los Angeles. I started a company there with my friend called the Hollywood Stock Exchange, and that's when I started getting involved in digital currencies and digital securities during the dot-com era. Then I sold that company in 2001, moved back to the south of France, and then met Stacy in 2003. And we were just immediately setting up home together. We just like, we were waiting to meet each other forever. And then we finally met each other and we started to do content. And the interesting thing about the content was to take Stacy's kind of professional experience with the BBC and other kind of television formats and combine it with some more entertaining skills, comedy skills, this type of thing, and come up with a blend that was which was just kind of its own became its own brand, if you will, became its own style. The Max and Stacy style evolved over a few years into something very unique and very, very watchable. And then when we went over to RT and started doing Keiser Report there, and then they dubbed it into Spanish, we were the number one show on RT English, number one show on RT Spanish. And so we were being, seen by millions of people every week.
Mm.
Of course, we started talking about Bitcoin. Stacy first mentioned Bitcoin on Keiser Report in 2010 when it was 25 cents. We then started covering it really more aggressively in 2011. It was at $1. And of course, we were the only ones covering Bitcoin on international television for years. And that's how we really got to be associated with Bitcoin, because we were the only outlet, public, broadcast to global international television that was covering Bitcoin pretty extensively. We had all the early pioneers on Keiser Report, like Amir Taki was on several times. He's a very Andreas Antonopoulos, and all the early pioneers. Adam Back, I think, was on early.
Peter Todd.
Peter Todd, and so that we kind of the show grew up alongside Bitcoin, and we that just have been rolling with it since.
Yeah, and remember, by the way,
Yeah.
when we, as he's describing, making those first for the first few years of Bitcoin, there was no commentary, there were no blogs, there was no Bitcoin Twitter, there was none of that. Like there's Bitcoin Talk, but to really try to understand what this even was. So we were like, it hadn't yet evolved to what it is today. Like it wasn't, people, we were all still feeling this giant elephant in the dark, that sort of thing of like, what is this thing? What is it? Is it a mountain?
Yeah.
Is it a tree? Is it a stick? If you're feeling the tail, like it was hard to, have the clarity then of what we have now.
Yeah, I believe it. Your guys' story is so interesting, especially with Max's comedy background, you coming from a TV production background, meeting in France in a cafe. I'm going to be waiting for someone from Hollywood to come after your movie rights really soon, because it looks like that is a story that needs to be told. And then becoming true pioneers of the Bitcoin space. And then I want to kind of reel this back to the Keiser Report. Now, back in 2009, long before Bitcoin was a household name, Looking back, do you feel like you were building the stage for Bitcoin before you ever even knew it existed? Because you two have just been so influential in bringing Bitcoin to the masses. I mean, it's incredible.
So we first talked about it in 2010, in December of 2010. So the price was 23 cents, not 25 cents. It's a 10% difference there. So no, so we started talking about it then, and we had already been on air, as I had explained, like for quite a few years, and we were already like anti-bank fraud, like the global banking fraud. At that time, there were like giant derivatives fraud and stuff like that, and central banks. We were anti-central banks. So we had a lot of gold bugs in our audience. And we went to a lot of gold conferences and things like that. We had talked to Peter Schiff many times by that point. And so we knew all the gold bugs very well. And we had a huge fan base for our show because we exposed all these banking crimes, the derivatives fraud, the high frequency trading fraud, the central bank bailout fraud, the naked shorting of gold and silver, things like that. And then we covered Bitcoin. And that first episode, we mentioned it and we talked about it. We didn't go deep into it. But then a bunch of Bitcoiners reached out to us because of that, right? Because of that episode. And I later, years later, found out that Bitcoin Talk, like they were talking about that we covered Bitcoin on the show. So once we interviewed John Matonis, who was an early Bitcoiner, about that, like, for the first time ever, we had huge negative reaction in the comments on YouTube to the episode, and people called it a shitcoin, Bitcoin more like shitcoin, they said, which is remarkable, right? Like that now it's, but people were the gold bugs in our audience were so against Bitcoin that it became more. I did all the research for the headlines. I would look for headlines every week. And so I was just like struck by the fact that they hated it so much. And maybe I might have dismissed it, or maybe not been so curious to look into it after that, because again, like nobody was talking about it. It wasn't a thing in the world until like all of us, like early adopters, made it a thing. But at that time, like the negative reaction from the gold bugs made me look deeper and harder into it. And so when more and more Bitcoiners, or those early Bitcoiners, started reaching out to us, like Amir Taki, who was like the only, people don't know him today, but at that time, he was the one that would go on the BBC or any early, new international news programs that would cover Bitcoin. He was the guy who made the first BIP. He was pretty well known at that time. So, and that's a long story, before he ran off to go fight ISIS and do some other stuff. But so we didn't really know, like we were just living our space, right? Like we were creating the space without realizing it.
Yeah, like Stacy was saying, we were big into gold and silver because it's international and global money. And the show Keiser Report's a global show. So you can't really talk about one region or another. You can't just talk about New York stocks because it broadcasts to the world. So the one form of money that is global is gold. So by kind of focusing on gold, you have a frame of reference for everybody in the world knows a little something about gold or has a little gold. And then, we did a campaign in 2011 called Crash JPMorgan Buy Silver, which was a very, very viral campaign. Hundreds of people were posting videos of them and their gold stack. Their silver stack. And, this campaign kicked off right after the 2008 crisis and some of the mergers that went on in Wall Street. And JPMorgan ended up buying or inheriting Bear Stearns' silver short position, and they were exposed. If silver got to $50 or $60 an ounce, JPMorgan would have gone bankrupt. So we were trying to flame the fire of this massive short squeeze to take JPMorgan down. And that was also when we began to look more into Bitcoin for its really subversive qualities, to exist outside of this very, very corrupt banking system. And so we dovetailed into Bitcoin from that point. And as Stacy has said, the reaction was quite negative because at that time, the gold bugs and the libertarians that were primary audience really hated the idea of Bitcoin. So it took about 5 or 6 years to get some traction in that camp, and that's been great, gaining every year. Now we're at another huge milestone with what's happening in Bitcoin around the world.
And like I had mentioned, by the way, so we had started podcasting before it was called podcasting, but this was also this crash buy silver, crash JPMorgan. So the act of buying silver, 1 ounce of silver, that was all we were asking people, suggesting to people, buy 1 ounce of silver. And it was like $7 at that time. So buy an ounce, everybody at $7, and you'll crash JPMorgan because they had inherited from Bear Stearns that huge, massive short position. So it made it to the front page of the Financial Times. JPMorgan was forced to respond to it. But this was the beginning of social media, the power of social media and alternative media. So we were on RT, but we were being broadcast. Like most people were accessing us on YouTube and early Twitter. So like this is the beginning of the power of alternative media and social media. Like now you're used to it, right? But at that time, this was like the beginning of that sort of punching through doing a financial news report. We were the first to do it. Nobody else had thought to do it. Bloomberg, CNBC, none of those had ever covered it in this way because it was like a gatekeeper, right? They were gatekeeping this, like the propaganda or the marketing for these big banks. And we broke through that, and because of RT, because of social media though as well, and alternative platforms like YouTube.